It doesn't matter whether you're black or brown or white or whatever the hell color you are. It doesn't matter. We are all Americans, and we're going to pull together as Americans.
The significance of Donald Trump's foray into the Bronx cannot be overstated. Indeed, so many different political pundits are trying to come up with different strategic ways to interpret what happened. Some are trying to say his rally in the Bronx was simply a dud that went nowhere. Others are trying to say that it's a magnificent thing that will lead to his election, or so on and so forth. But very few people are considering what is happening right now, not just with the Bronx, but with Trump's growing popularity across demographics, across racial groups, so on and so forth. And in pop culture, his growth in pop culture, they are ignoring the civilizational importance of the Trump phenomenon. There's something that should be stated right at the get-go. Most Americans, regardless of ideology, and I'll talk about ideology in this video, regardless of ideology, want much of the same thing. They have many of the same desires that other people of different ideologies crave. They want safe communities, they want a stable society, and they want a good life for their kids, and they want a country they can be proud about. But for the past 150 plus years, the specter and curse of progressivism and progressive policies have produced the opposite of stable communities, the opposite of a stable country, and the opposite of a safe place for their kids. Progressives, for example, they exalt criminals and they enable criminal behavior in the name of benevolence by getting rid of things like cash bail and trying to reduce the penalties for violations of property rights, which is the foundational set of rights in America. Without property, you cannot be free. Without property, you cannot have a country or a civilization. You can simply have serfs who are working for an elite class that have no care for their own personal needs or desires to own something. So in exchange for community relationships, progressives have increased the sense of welfarism. They have increased the sense of relying on the government, and they have convinced children of different identity groups that the world is either against them in one way or the other based on their immutable characteristics. Most importantly, progressives have convinced average people that patriotism is xenophobia, and that rejecting America's intervention across the world and rejecting the ideology that follows that intervention called internationalism is xenophobia, and it must be stamped out, and that all cultures, regardless of where they come from, have to be equal. But the Trump phenomenon represents a distinct return to a kind of American-based conservatism, born from the principles of the founding generation, which emphasize natural law, the idea that there are truths beyond our social or political situations that bind all of us regardless of where we are, that emphasize reason as a value, the idea that you can question the government, you can question the propositions of other people, regardless of what their status is, because status does not confer truth. Moral correctness and the correctness of claims, that confers truth. Strong families, strong communities, intact families, and a sovereign nation, all being the antidote of the damage that leftism has done to our nation. The Trump phenomenon represents all these things in some way, shape, or form, even if it does not represent them in a completely pure and undistilled fashion. The universality of the Trump phenomenon is why Donald Trump is resonating in areas that conventional political minds do not believe he should be resonating in, like the Bronx and New Jersey, or like the inroads he's making with the black community, like the inroads he's making with Gen Z, which he is 2 points up ahead of Biden, according to polls. When you cut through political jargon and complex terminology, most people have indeed the same needs and will gravitate towards them regardless of ideological consideration. Trump is a super phenomenon which embodies the fundamentally American tradition of common sense, which, by the way, if you don't know about this tradition, I would encourage you to read about it, because this is not just the common sense that you have about things that happen in the world. This is a common sense about reality, which informs both social and political truths that is fundamentally American in its departure from the kind of status-based thinking of the old world. It's a civilizational quality that is so unique to America that we have an entire intellectual tradition spanning from the 18th century to the 19th century, 20th century rather, about this. He represents the outcomes of this tradition, and by doing so, cuts across all barriers. The intelligentsia Conventional political minds bound to polls and charts and strategy, and the Washington class will not understand this. But thankfully, their understanding is not necessary, because a revival of American common sense is inevitable. I posit that since the 1930s, my friends, we have been under a kind of political and moral dark ages in this country, where certain political realities were conceived to be necessary for the existence of our country, when in all reality they were corrosive to the existence of our country. And I say the 1930s because when you look at America before the 1930s, you get presidents like Calvin Coolidge, who were undistilled versions of American constitutionalism, who understood what it meant to be a conservative, and who understood that sort of local mentality the American spirit required, unrestrained mentality that American spirit required within the context of our founding generation traditions. But then you go beyond that. In the 1930s, you see FDR and the progressives creating this superstructure of administrative entities known today as the deep state, which effectively corroded the independence of American communities and created a lie in the minds of so many different Americans that told them that without the government, without some kind of imposing authority, or most importantly, without the expert class, their lives were somehow going to be in peril, they will be missing something, or some kind of injustice would be had. And those lies, those claims, which have gone unchallenged in the minds of Americans for decades after decades, resulted in the dissolution of the separation of powers. It resulted in the accumulation of power within the centralized class. It resulted in a sort of cultural servility towards the experts and administrations, and it resulted in one of the greatest erosions of the Constitution that we have seen in the history of this nation. And for so long, all of those things, the result of this dark ages of administration and false expert enlightenment, were conceived to be the way things had to be. Because if you were to oppose, for example, welfare, you would then be called an enemy of the poor, and most importantly, a foe to charity. If you were to oppose one of the products of this dark ages, which is the lie of internationalism, that America has to be everywhere, in every case, in every country, or else the world order will collapse and the world will go into chaos and we'll all die eventually. If you were to accept of that narrative, you were called some kind of traitor, and you were put on watch list. Yes, look at FDR's presidency. He put people on watch lists for opposing the war effort and World War II. Look at LBJ. They put people on watch lists for being against the Vietnam War. Look at so many different people. They put people on watch lists. Americans expressing their inherent natural desire of speech, using that God-given faculty to bring forth truth and righteousness. They were put on watch lists. They were subverted. Look at COINTELPRO. They were overtaken by government forces because they were a threat to the establishment. And for so long, that went unchallenged in a significant way. But then Donald Trump comes along, and his iconoclasm unintentionally disables the power that these unchallenged truths have over people, and things that were considered taboo and unacceptable through the Overton window became not only common sense, but rallying calls for moral outcomes. That is the significance of Trump 2024. Because whether you agree with him or not, because there are some, trust me, there are areas that I think Trump is not correct in. But regardless of if you agree with him or not, you cannot ignore one thing. The phenomenon he represents is distinctive from the past 60 or 70 years of American history that has been stale, has been unenlightened, and has had these so-called truths forced upon Americans without much consideration to the contrary, except in the circles of those who are sophisticated enough to know the problems of the dominant geopolitical narratives and political narratives, rather, of our time. That is the significance of the Trump phenomenon. And that is why every American, I don't care what you are, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're young, I don't care if you're whatever you are, if you love our country and you understand the merits of 1776 and you understand the virtues of the American philosophy, you should understand that regardless of what people say, this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime. You hear that phrase so often that it becomes laughable. But I'm sorry, when you look at the conditions of our society right now, if you see where America's position is in the world right now, and if you see what is happening, which hasn't happened for a very, very long time, Americans coming together, Americans disregarding ideology and embracing common sense and moving forth towards a better future, you must understand that this election, unfortunately, is most definitely make or break. So the question I leave to you, dear viewer, is very simple. Will we go towards a political dark ages or continue to going into a political dark ages where certain emergent realities and where the mediocre talking points of the media and the establishment class go unchallenged and they not only they go unchallenged, but they remain in power? Or will we go towards an age where fundamentally American premises and American philosophy is not only emphasized, but it is reinserted back into our institutions to reclaim what has been lost through years and years and years of de-Americanization that has happened at the behest of radical left-wing progressives? You decide, my friends. If you like this video, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to help me get this channel out there. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please, stay pensive. Bye, guys.